Well, welcome to a slightly damp and ever so slightly muggy forest just outside Frankfurt in Germany, where we have come to drive this, the updated Opel Grandland. Note, it's not Grandland X anymore, just Grandland. Now, Grandland has been on sale since 2017. You could be forgiven for not having noticed because of the three SUVs that are built off this platform by Opel, by Peugeot and by Citroën. It's probably been the least interesting. I mean, compared to the Citroën C5 Aircross and the Peugeot 3008, the Grandland has always been somewhat the vanilla choice. Well, Opel is trying to rectify some of that now because we've got this, the new Opel Visor front-end styling, which does away with the slightly ordinary lights and grille of the old one and brings in this new one-piece. It's not actually one piece, but it kind of looks like it might be. Lights and grille effect. These are new, very high-tech pixel LED headlights that are supposed to be even more precise and even more adaptable than the matrix LED systems used by some rival car makers. There's also a little night vision camera tucked in here under the Opel badge. God knows who will select that as an option in Ireland, but it could be useful. It can see objects 100 meters away in the dark and alert the driver to their presence. Now, I think the styling changes have worked up to a point. I mean, the visor we'll see on all Opels in the next little while, but you can kind of see around here where it's sort of been glued onto the structure that was there before, so it doesn't quite blend as nicely as it does on, say, the new Mokka crossover, which was purpose designed to have that front end. Also, on this particular model, this is an elite spec version. They've coloured in the little panels at the bottom of the body, and that kind of makes it look a bit thicker and a bit chunkier, and maybe that's good and maybe that's not so good. There's another version, the SRI, which these are filled in black, and that looks a little bit sleeker, I think. Around the back, there's new brake lights. You've got Grandland spelt out across the back of it in nice chrome letters. It all looks a little bit sharper and a little bit neater. It's not too shabby. Now, you've got a pretty full range of engine options. You can have a 1.2 petrol with 130 horsepower. You can have a 1.5 diesel with 130 horsepower. Or you can now have a choice of two plug-in hybrid versions. This one is front-wheel drive, has 224 horsepower, and CO2 emissions as low as 28-29 grams per kilometre. There is a higher spec version with four-wheel drive, a rear-mounted electric motor, and 300 horsepower, which is very much the flagship performance model. Now, we've had that one on sale in Ireland before in the previous version of the Grandland, but this is the first time that we'll get the more affordable front-wheel drive plug-in hybrid. Now, you can say what you like about plug-in hybrids. Some people regard them as essentially quite pointless, that people don't use them properly, people don't plug in and charge them up enough. But if you do, Opel says you can get as much as 65 kilometers of range from the electric system before the petrol engine cuts in. And so far, we've been driving around this kind of terrain, lots of mountainous roads. We're averaging 4.5 litres per 100 kilometres running in hybrid mode. So that's not too shabby. So in here is the other big change for the Grandland, which does away with the rather plain and ordinary dashboard that the old car had, which also felt a little bit cheap and tacky in places. And in comes this new Opel standard fit, more or less, digital dashboard. You've got a big screen here in the center that can go up to 10 inches across. You've got a digital instrument panel in front of the driver that can go up to 12 inches across. And it all looks suitably high-tech and works reasonably well, as we've become used to with products from what was PSA Group, what's now Stellantis. Some of the functions and some of the controls up here on the screen are a little bit fiddly to use, but thankfully Opel, being sensible German types, they've kept proper controls for the heating, ventilation and air conditioning, and that is very pleasant. The seats are very good, it's very comfortable, and overall it feels like quality has taken a slight step up, although bearing in mind this is a top spec model, so this is getting all the nicest bits you can find. It might not look and feel quite so nice in a more basic version. There's reasonable space in the back seats. It's maybe not the most exceptionally roomy car around, but it is okay, and there is a decent boot out the back. Overall, I'd say this is a pretty solid effort. It's not exceptional in any sense, but it is quite nice. It is definitely a step up on what went before. I don't know if it's enough to really kick the Grandland back up in people's estimation, but it might do. Well, in driving terms, The Grandland is much as it was before. I mean, there hasn't been any dramatic change nor alteration to the actual mechanical package underneath. And overall, it feels competent and quite pleasant, but again, not all that memorable. It certainly doesn't have the kind of punchy steering feel that you get with the Peugeot 3008, nor does it have that long travel suspension loping comfort that you get with the Citroën C5 Aircross. Again, like the styling, like the cabin layout, it's kind of occupying the middle ground, and you can decide, I guess, whether that middle ground is more about appealing to more people or whether it's about a bit of an uncomfortable bit of fence sitting. I must say though, it is quite nice to drive. I think Opel has improved the steering feel and weighting ever so slightly. It really could do with a bit more meat on the steering bones, but again, it's not bad, it's just not particularly entertaining nor memorable. Then again, for someone who's buying a medium-sized family SUV, maybe that's not the most important point. The hybrid system on this front-wheel drive version is very good. Now, we're familiar with it from other cars in the Stellantis group, notably the Peugeot 3008 and 508 and the Citroën C5 Aircross. It works, generally speaking, quite well. As I mentioned earlier, we're getting very decent fuel economy out of it on what is, it must be said, quite a short test loop. Obviously, if you're going longer range on the motorway, you won't get sort of 60, 65 miles per gallon like we've been getting so far. It will probably drop down to more like 40 mpg, I would imagine, based on what I've driven in other cars using this setup. Whether you'll get that 65 kilometer one charge range on the fully charged up battery, I'm really not sure. It'll probably be something more like 45 to 50 kilometers, particularly if you're using the air conditioning going up and downhill a lot. But it does have a B mode for the gearbox, which allows you a bit more regenerative braking, which is what we're doing now, going downhill. So it will top up the battery a little bit as you go along. It is very, very refined. It's a nice little 1.6 turbo petrol engine. PSA Group has been using this engine for donkey's years now, and it's still very nice to drive with. You will occasionally feel a little sort of double tap from the transmission as you accelerate, as it kind of works out whether it needs to be using petrol or electric or both. But overall, it's very well set up. It's very simple and easy to use. But as with all plug-in hybrids, the caveat is you need to have a driveway, you need to have a home charging point. And if you're going to all that trouble in the first place, well, maybe you also need to be looking at going fully electric. Then again, there is still an argument that says PHEVs, plug-in hybrids, have their place. They are for people who need to do regular, longer journeys, but still want to be able to drive on zero emissions power around town and on short hops. And if you are prepared to make the effort and go to that length of remembering to plug in regularly and make full use of the electric half of the powertrain, well then, there is a point to them. A quick word on ride comfort. Well, frankly, it's impossible to tell because we're driving this car in Germany and the roads are just so beautifully surfaced that there's absolutely no way of telling how this will react on Irish tarmac. It feels quite firmly suspended in that Germanic tradition, but so far on these excellent roads, it is very comfortable and very nicely controlled. Again, Irish roads could put that a bit more to the test. We'll just have to wait and see. Again, overall, there's nothing much you can really criticise here. I mean, it's not exciting, it's not thrilling to drive, but it's perfectly competent, perfectly pleasant. If you drove one of these every day, you probably wouldn't ever actually remember having driven it, but neither would there be anything that would particularly annoy or vex you. It's fine. It's absolutely good. It's absolutely right in the middle of what probably most people want out of a family SUV.